I hear a lot of YouTubers talk about a game's accessibility when what they're actually referring to is a title's availability. That is, how easy it is to buy or otherwise obtain. That leads to instances like the skill-heavy Devil May Cry 3, which requires quick reactions and timed inputs, being wrongly referred to as accessible just because it's been released on a bunch of different platforms. In actuality, accessibility is about inclusion, allowing as many people as possible to play and enjoy your game, regardless of any conditions, disabilities, or needs they may have. A very basic example of this would be subtitles, allowing the hearing impaired to enjoy games. Sadly, accessibility options in games are still wildly inconsistent, despite the industry now being several decades old, and something as basic as subtitling isn't guaranteed. I know I complain about this a lot, but the Spyro Reignited trilogy launched without subtitles. At the time, Activision said, "There's no industry standard for subtitles." Yeah, that is frankly shocking and inexcusable, but then they followed up with an insincere, Activision care about the fans' experience, especially with respect to accessibility. The game did get a patch that added subtitles later on, but the reputational damage had already been done. In my day job, I'm an instructional designer. I create interactive digital training materials. We adhere to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These set out how to make digital experiences as inclusive as possible for people with various needs. This includes considerations for visuals, sounds, and also input, such as supporting keyboard-only navigation, as some people can't use a mouse. It honestly baffles me that a similar set of principles don't exist for video games and their certification processes. We're going to have a brief overview of these key accessibility areas, but each one could easily be a series of videos in its own right. This will be scratching the surface with some strong examples to give you a decent idea of accessibility as a whole. Sound goes beyond subtitling. It's important to more than just the game's cutscenes and story. Resident Evil 2 2019 had such good sound design that, with headphones on, I could tell exactly where Mr. X was through his footsteps alone. It was a crucial tool that regularly factored into my moment-to-moment decision-making during play. This seems to be something Sony are particularly keen to push with the PS5's 3D audio. Audio also clues you into enemy attack patterns. How many times do you hear a boss spout a specific line before doing a certain move?
Get a load at this! Get a load at this!
Hearing-impaired players don't get that same heads up, and in turn have to react that much faster. The Batman Arkham games have a visual alert when an enemy's about to attack that's been stolen by many other titles because it's no doubt invaluable to those audiences. Watchdog's Legion takes things a step further with subtitles for environmental noises. Cars screeching, guns firing, and other important information is relayed to players who would otherwise miss out. Remember Metal Gear Solid, where you had to tap on walls to find weak spots to blow up with C4? The spots you needed sounded hollow compared to the rest of the walls. Now, how's someone with a hearing impairment supposed to conquer this challenge? Well, the targets also look slightly different too. You can even get a codec hint saying they might not have repainted them yet. This is a kind of inclusive design consideration that you just have to applaud, especially this early on when hardly anyone else was doing it. What about visual impairments? Imagine trying to play Puyo Puyo while colorblind. Things suddenly become nigh on impossible. While playing the Link's Awakening remake, there was a puzzle where you needed to knock coloured enemies into corresponding holes. Notice what they did to accommodate for the visually impaired. They also assigned a unique shape to each colour. This is another example where able players don't lose anything, they might not even notice it, but the visually impaired are included. Games like The Last of Us Part 2 and Spider-Man Miles Morales have introduced high contrast modes that make it much easier to pick out your player character, enemies, and interactive objects. It's so effective that, combined with other accessibility features, a blind player was able to finish The Last of Us Part 2. The game then went on to win the Innovation in Accessibility category at the Game Awards this year. Of course, it did also win pretty much every other award, but I'm also really excited for the possibilities haptic feedback and the DualSense controller will provide. Touch is an incredibly important sensory input, and I was amazed at the haptic feedback in Astro's Playroom. I could feel raindrops falling. Every surface had a different texture. I think if used properly, it could open up a ton of accessibility solutions. Microsoft are also focusing on their controllers in a much more direct way. The adaptive controller is specifically designed for people with motor issues. It allows players to use more than just their hands. They don't think the input device should be a physical barrier anymore, and I absolutely applaud them for it. The PlayStation 5 offers console-level accessibility options. You have the now expected controller remappings, but the addition of features like a built-in screen reader serve as evidence the industry is starting to take inclusion and accessibility tools much more seriously. Customizing difficulty could also be considered an accessibility option, with many games starting to implement an I'm just here for the story option. Persona 4 Golden's Vita and Steam versions, which released 8 years apart, show how much thinking has changed in that time. The Vita version asks you to choose a difficulty setting up front and locks you into that, while the Steam version not only lets you change it up at any time, it even provides more granular options, allowing you to adjust damage, loot, and retries. At the other end of the spectrum, the Demon's Souls remake came out 11 years after the original, during which time the industry had learned a lot and made some significant changes, but it doesn't include any difficulty options. Bluepoint considered an easy mode, but they decided against it, saying they wanted to preserve the spirit and intent of the original creators. Something designers in all fields, myself included, commonly forget is that they're not making a personal passion project for themselves. They're making a commercial product for an external audience. Actively choosing to exclude potential players is rather arrogant in my view, while also harming the bottom line. You can have a normal mode, balanced to match your original intent which your core audience can continue to use, and an easy mode for those who need it without losing anything. I'd argue you only stand to gain from it by giving yourself a larger customer base. Again, these are all topics that could be explored in greater depth in their own videos. I'd highly recommend watching Game Maker's Toolkit's Designing for Disability playlist. They're eye-opening, essential viewing for anyone working in any form of interactive design. For now, I'll get off my soapbox and just say that this has been Sam. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll hopefully see you in future videos.